name is David Rourke, and until that Sunday afternoon in November, I thought I understood exactly who my in-laws were. My wife Claire and I had been married for 9 years. We met in Atlanta at a work conference. She was in pharmaceutical sales. I was in supply chain logistics. And we built a life together the way most people do, slowly, imperfectly, with a lot of Costco runs and disagreements about whose turn it was to call the plumber. We had a son, Ethan, who was 7 years old and obsessed with dinosaurs and YouTube videos about volcanoes. He was the best thing I'd ever been part of. Claire's family was French, not French-American, not my grandmother was from Lyon, French, actually French. Her parents had immigrated to Montreal in the 90s, and then her father's work brought them to Charlotte about 15 years ago. Her mother, her father, her younger brother, Remy, and her aunt Sylvie all still spoke French at home, at family dinners, in the car, on the phone. Always French. Around me they'd switch to English politely, the way you'd turn down the music when a guest arrives who doesn't know the song. What none of them knew, what Claire herself had no idea about, was that I had spent 4 years in Paris. I was 23 when I took a semester abroad at Sciences Po as part of my MBA program. 1 semester turned into 4 years. I worked for a logistics firm in the 15th arrondissement, lived in a tiny apartment near Bir Hakeim, dated a woman named Delphine for 2 of those years, and by the time I came back to the States at 27, I was functionally fluent. Not textbook fluent, street fluent. I knew how to argue with a bureaucrat at the prefecture. I knew what people meant when they dropped into slang. I knew the difference between what French people say and what they mean. When I met Claire, I honestly just forgot to mention it. That sounds impossible, I know, but it came up the same way a lot of things don't come up when you're falling in love. There was always something more immediate to talk about, and then enough time passed that it felt strange to bring up. And then it felt like a secret even though it wasn't one. And then it was just a fact I carried quietly like an old passport in the back of a drawer. Her family assumed I spoke nothing. I never corrected them. The Sunday in November was her parents' anniversary. Her mother Marguerite had turned the occasion into a full production. Roasted duck, a tart from a French bakery in Ballantyne, her good china that only came out twice a year. Claire's father, Henri, sat at the head of the table looking the way he always did, satisfied, proprietary, a man who had decided his opinions were facts and saw no reason to revisit that decision. Remy was there with his girlfriend. Aunt Sylvie had driven up from Charleston. I sat across from Henri and helped Ethan cut his duck. The conversation started in English as it always did. How was work? How was school? Had we seen the game? Wasn't the weather this fall extraordinary? And then, the way water finds the lowest point in a room, it drifted into French. A comment from Sylvie to Marguerite about the tart. A response from Henri. A laugh I wasn't part of. I kept eating. Il ne comprend rien, Henri said. He doesn't understand a thing. Jamais si, Marguerite agreed. Never. Remy refilled his wine glass. I reached for the bread. What happened next was not loud. It wasn't a dramatic announcement. It was a quiet family conversation happening 3 feet from my face in a language they'd decided I didn't speak, about things they'd decided I didn't need to know. Marguerite said, and I remember this precisely because I've replayed it probably 200 times since then. Claire told me again she wants to stay in Charlotte. Henri, she will not move. Henri set down his fork. She doesn't have a choice. The position in Lyon is everything we planned. She's been in this country long enough. She has a son, Remy said. He sounded uncomfortable. The boy is 7, Henri said. 7-year-olds adapt. And the husband? Sylvie asked. Henri's expression didn't change. He picked his fork back up. The husband's job can be done from anywhere. He follows. That is what husbands do. And if he won't? Marguerite asked. Then Claire comes alone. She's wanted this for years. She just won't say it to his face. Lyon is her home. Not Atlanta, not Charlotte. Lyon. We never should have let this go on so long. I looked at Ethan. He had a piece of duck on his fork, and he was examining it the way he examined everything, with complete focus, a tiny scientist taking inventory of the world. He had no idea what was being discussed over his head. "She told you this?" Remy asked his mother. "That she wants to leave. She doesn't have to tell me," Marguerite said. "I'm her mother. I know." "She said she was tired," Sylvie offered. "When I called her last month, she said she was tired of everything being so American." The word landed on the table like a small stone. "David isn't a bad man," Remy said. He said it carefully, the way you'd say something you're not sure you're allowed to say. "He's a good father." "He's adequate," Henri said. I took a sip of water. "The problem," Henri said. I took a sip of water. "The problem," Henri continued, "is that Claire married for emotion, not for sense. She was 29. She panicked. This is what women do when they're afraid they've waited too long. It wasn't judgment, it was fear." "Henri," Marguerite said softly, not a protest, more like a gentle correction of volume. "I'm not wrong," he said. "The move to Lyon solves everything. New environment. Claire comes back to herself. Ethan grows up bilingual in a real country, and..." He glanced toward me with the benevolent disinterest you'd give a piece of furniture. "David figures out the rest." "And the house?" Remy asked. "Claire's name is on the deed," Henri said. There it was. I thought about the conversation Claire and I had had 3 months earlier, when she'd been quiet for a week, and I'd finally sat her down and asked what was going on, and she'd said, "Nothing. I'm just tired, David. I'm just tired." I'd believed her. I'd run her a bath and ordered Thai food and let it go, because sometimes people are just tired, and I thought I was being a good husband by not pressing. I thought about the trip to Lyon her parents had taken her on in September, the one she'd said was just to visit old friends, the one she'd come back from looking lighter somehow, like something had been decided. I thought about the way she'd been on her phone more lately, late at night, turned away from me. I folded my napkin in my lap. Henri said something to Sylvie about the logistics of an international move. Schools, the exchange rate, shipping furniture. Marguerite was nodding. Remy was quiet, turning his wine glass by the stem. Ethan looked up at me. "Dad, can I be done?" "2 more bites," I said. He made the face 7-year-olds make and went back to his duck. I looked at Henri. He was gesturing with his fork, explaining something about a neighborhood in the 6th arrondissement, the schools there, the markets. He spoke with the confidence of a man who had been making decisions about other people's lives for so long he'd forgotten it required their participation. I said in French. In the French I'd learned in a cramped apartment near a bridge where the light came in yellow in the evenings. "Actually, Henri, Ethan is registered for 2nd grade here through June. I think we should let him finish the year." The table went silent. It wasn't loud. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't drop a bomb or throw a plate. I said it the way you'd say anything at a dinner table, conversationally, with the mild air of someone contributing a relevant detail to an ongoing discussion. But the ongoing discussion had not been meant for me. Marguerite's hand stopped mid-reach for the breadbasket. Remy looked at me with an expression I will probably never forget, half horror, half something that looked almost like relief. Sylvie put her wineglass down very carefully. Henri stared at me. I held his gaze. I kept my voice level. I said, still in French, "I lived in Paris for 4 years, went to Sciences Po, worked in logistics near the 15th. I've been fluent since I was 27. Claire doesn't know. I've been meaning to tell her." Marguerite made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "How long?" Henri said. It wasn't a question. Since I sat down, I said, "But I've understood everything at every dinner for 9 years. He had the look of a man recalibrating, recalculating, pulling back through 9 years of dinners, of conversations, of asides and confidences and things said at full volume in a language they were certain would dissolve on contact with my ears. Claire came through the kitchen door with a dish towel in her hands. She'd been in there with the coffee. She looked at the table and stopped. "What happened?" she said. No one spoke. "What happened?" she said again, looking at me. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about everything. I thought about the bath I'd run her, the Thai food, the September trip to Lyon. The phone turned away from me in the dark. I thought about Ethan eating his duck with total concentration, cataloguing everything, absorbing everything, the way children do. Your father and I were just talking, I said, in English, in French. She looked at her father. Henri looked at the table. The drive home that night was quiet in the way that houses are quiet right after a fire. Not peaceful, just cleared out. Ethan fell asleep in his car seat. Claire stared at the window on her side. She didn't ask me to explain. I think she already understood more than I did. When we got home and got Ethan to bed, I sat down across from her at the kitchen table. She had her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking. I told her everything. Paris, the years, Delphine, the apartment near Bir Hakeim. The way I'd meant to tell her when we first met and then didn't and then couldn't. Every dinner I'd sat through. Every conversation her family had had in front of me, as though I were furniture. She listened without interrupting. Her face was very still. When I finished, she said, "Tonight. Everything tonight?" "Yes." She closed her eyes. "Claire," I said, "did you want to go to Lyon?" She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I got my answer before she spoke. "I don't know," she said. "I don't know what I want. I think I've been telling myself for years that I know, and tonight I'm not sure of anything." It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in months, maybe longer. What came next was not a movie. It was not clean or fast or satisfying. We spent 2 months in marriage counseling with a woman named Dr. Pressler who had an office in Midtown and a way of asking questions that made you feel like you'd walked into them yourself. We had bad nights and worse mornings. Claire called her parents twice and didn't tell me what was said. I called my brother and told him everything, and he was quiet for a while and then said, "What do you want?" And I realized I hadn't asked myself that question in years either. What I wanted was Ethan, whatever happened between Claire and me, and I understood, honestly, in a way I hadn't let myself understand before that Sunday, that I didn't know what was going to happen between Claire and me. What I needed was for my son to know he was not a logistical detail in someone else's plan. I talked to a family attorney. I didn't file anything. I just needed to understand where I stood. She explained that in North Carolina, custody was determined by the child's best interests, that international relocation with a minor required court approval if the other parent objected, that Claire's name being on the deed of our house was relevant but not determinative. I took notes. I went home and made Ethan pancakes and watched 2 episodes of a nature documentary about deep-sea creatures with him and held it together until he went to bed. Claire did not go to Lyon. Not that spring, not that summer. We did not stay married. That decision came slowly. The way seasons change, you don't notice until one day the quality of light is different and you realize something has already shifted. It wasn't one thing. It was the accumulation of many things, including 9 years of a language difference that had nothing to do with French. We told Ethan together, sitting on the floor of his room with the dinosaur posters on the wall. He was 8 by then. He asked if he'd have to change schools. We said no. He asked if we both still come to his soccer games. We said yes. He nodded, taking inventory the way he always did, cataloging the new shape of things. We worked out a custody arrangement that kept him in Charlotte, that kept him close to both of us, that didn't require him to become anybody's plan. Claire's parents came to visit the following winter, and Henri and I sat in the same kitchen and drank coffee and said very little to each other in any language. Remy texted me separately. Just a short message. "I'm sorry about what you heard. For what it's worth, I always thought you were more than adequate." I kept that message longer than I should have. The thing I think about most when I think about that November dinner is not the moment I spoke. It's not the expression on Henry's face, or the sound Marguerite made, or the way Remy looked like a man who'd been waiting for a door to open. It's Ethan. It's Ethan at that table, carefully inspecting his duck, completely unaware that the adults around him were negotiating his future, in a language they'd assumed only some of them understood. And I think about how many moments in a child's life are like that, how much gets decided above their heads, how much they absorb without knowing it, how the things we think we're hiding from them are the things they carry longest. I teach him French now, a little bit, on Sunday mornings, at this same kitchen table. He's 9. He's better at it than I expected. He asks me sometimes why I know French, and I tell him I used to live in a city where that was what people spoke, and that it's important to understand what's happening around you, especially when people think you're not listening. He thinks about that for a second, the way he thinks about everything, then he nods and goes back to his pancakes and files it away. I keep coming back to the breadbasket. That's the image that stays with me from that Sunday. Not the moment I spoke, not Henri's face going still, not the sound of Claire dropping the dish towel. It's me reaching for the bread while my father-in-law decided my future out loud, 3 feet from my face, in a language he was certain I didn't understand. There's something in that image I've spent a lot of time with, the calm of it, the choice to stay quiet and keep listening before deciding what to do. Henri was not a cruel man in the obvious sense. He was a man who had never been asked to question his own certainty, and so he never did. He believed he was acting in his daughter's best interest. He probably still believes that, and in a strange way, understanding that, really sitting with it instead of just being angry, was the thing that kept me from handling that dinner badly. I could have erupted. I could have made it a scene, a confrontation, something that would have felt satisfying for about 40 seconds and then caused damage that Ethan would have been absorbing for years. I didn't, not because I was the bigger person in some self-congratulatory way, but because I was thinking clearly enough to know what actually mattered. That's the part I want Ethan to understand someday, when he's old enough. Not the French, not the gotcha moment at the dinner table, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that found it satisfying. What I want him to understand is that knowing something and knowing what to do with what you know are 2 completely different skills. I had the language for 9 years. What I didn't have for a long time was the patience to use it correctly. There's a kind of quiet intelligence in staying still when everything in you wants to move. I've watched Ethan do it with other kids on the soccer field. Absorb something, say nothing, wait. He didn't get that from nowhere. And I think about all the things I absorbed over 9 years of those dinners, the things that should have registered as warnings and didn't, because I was busy being comfortable instead of paying attention. Real clarity isn't just about being smart. It's about being honest with yourself about what you're seeing, even when the seeing is inconvenient. The grit came later, not at the dinner table. That part honestly wasn't hard. The hard part was the 2 years after. The counseling, the nights I didn't sleep well, the process of rebuilding a version of my life that wasn't the one I'd planned on, in a way that still left room for Ethan to feel safe and wanted and unhurried. That took more out of me than any single moment of confrontation ever could. Anyone can speak up, holding steady over a long stretch of ordinary difficult days. That's the thing that actually requires something from you. I don't teach Ethan French because of what happened at that dinner. I teach him because I want him to move through the world understanding more of it than people expect him to. I want him to know that the effort you put into understanding something, a language, a person, a situation, is never wasted, even when it doesn't pay off in any obvious way for years. He filed that away, same as everything else. That's enough for me.